5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's Lichtman Live. God save our gracious King. Long live our noble. Wait. Sorry. Wait a second, Dad. I thought we were in America. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, go back in history, right, Sam? Go to the 18th century. What did we do? For about 8 years, we fought a revolution, spilled a lot of blood to get the American colonists out from under the thumb of King George. As one down-home philosopher recently put it, we got rid of them kings, didn't we? Yes, we did. Or did we? At least we thought we got rid of those kings until we arrived in the age of Trump. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
We couldn't even make it. We couldn't even hit the 250 birthday before we got another king, Dad. That's pretty sad.
Yeah, we didn't have to wait even a month before we got another king. And don't take my word for it. What did Trump recently do in New York City?
So, right. I mean, if you've been living under a rock and you're not familiar what we're referring to, New York City announced, what do they call it? Surge pricing. Congestion pricing. So $9 to drive into the city at a certain time to reduce traffic. Trump stopped that, and then after he stopped that, he tweeted a AI photo of him on the Time cover, and the cover said "Long live the King," and in the caption of the tweet or whatever, or the Truth Social post, whatever he did, he said "Long live the King." He's calling himself the King, Dad.
And he had this picture of himself with a crown. Something like this, right?
That's the most old man way to present yourself. Yeah, I like that. That's funny as hell.
Yeah, I could put on a crown too. And you know what? I probably have more of a claim to be a king than Donald Trump does, because I'm a direct descendant of King Saul and King David. I have biblical authority to be a king.
Are you? I didn't know that. Since when is that a thing?
Yeah, so Trump has opened the door to us kings.
Nice. All right, King
and
Allan.
Now we have dueling kings, and I even have a crown to prove it, just like Trump made up and manufactured a crown.
It looks incredible, I have to say.
Yeah, but to be serious, this is not anomalous. I mean, it's the ultimate extreme, of course, declaring yourself a king. But Trump has been, in essence, declaring himself a king for some time. After all, he's infamous for saying, echoing Richard Nixon, who said it after he was out of office, but Trump said it while he was in office, repeated it the first time, repeated it again the second time. I can do anything I want as president. In other words, without putting the crown on, he essentially said, I'm a king. He even said, to stay in power, we should do anything, including suspend the Constitution. And as we talked about last week, what did he say about someone who's saving the country?
He said, the person who saves the country can break no laws, or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
He's inviolate. Again, not explicitly declaring himself a king, but in effect declaring himself a king. Now he's done so absolutely openly. And remember, Trump has talked about being president for life, like a king, right, who serves until they die. Talked about having unlimited terms, despite the 22nd Amendment limiting a president to 2 full terms. One of his acolytes even introduced a bill to exempt Trump from the 22nd Amendment.
Yeah, I was going to, wrong thing. I was going to bring up, I saw a clip of Steve Bannon today, the guy you wanted to bring onto the podcast.
Yeah, but I don't think we're going to do that. At least we have no plans to.
Right. But he was, it was a clip of him saying that he wants Trump again in 2028.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what a king does. a king serves forever. And what authority does a king have? His authority does not derive from popular sovereignty, right? People don't vote one way or another for kings. People become kings either by the sword, by violence, or by the divine right. They are endowed by God to rule. And Trump has come very close, not only to declaring himself a king, but to declaring himself divinely anointed. What did he say after the abortive assassination? Which, by the way, contrary to what a lot of Trump cronies have said, the would-be assassin had nothing to do with Biden, the Democrats, or liberals. So what did he say when he survived that?
He said that God saved him from the bullet, or directed the
To do
bullet,
what?
or
To save the country,
to save the
right?
country. Yeah.
In effect saying he's ordained by God. And a lot of his supporters among evangelical Christians have kind of echoed that, saying he has been sent by God to do God's bidding here on earth. And I made reference to King David, and he said, like King David or others, he is a flawed individual, but nonetheless is the messenger of God sent down to rule over us and to save us. And there's more to it than that, maybe a little bit more prosaic than pronouncing yourself king. Trump swooped in to deal with a local issue, what New York City was doing to relieve congestion. And according to reports, it worked. That driving through New York was fundamentally different than it's been for decades. A much more swift, efficient, safe, and pleasurable experience. Too much for Donald Trump. So we had the federal government swoop in and override what a local government decided. This is in fundamental contradiction to what Trump and conservatives have been proclaiming for a long time, right? Proclaiming states' rights, the rights of states to be free of national interference. Trump said during the pandemic, quote, "I like to allow governors to make decisions without overruling them, because from a constitutional standpoint, that's the way it should be done."
The Constitution.
Federalist. You can call it the Constitution, but I call it the Constitution. I'd rather have the locals make their decisions. This is Donald Trump. And then in justifying the overturning of Roe versus Wade, he said, it's a states' right issue. We should let the states decide and not have a federal rule. Not just Donald Trump. The Republican platform of 2016, when Trump was first elected, said, quote, "Every violation of state sovereignty by federal officials is not merely a transgression of one government against another, it is an assault on the liberties of individual Americans," unquote. Speaker Johnson said, "I am a 10th American guy." 10th American says, those powers not explicitly given to the federal government are reserved to the states. The idea of federalism, Johnson said, is uniquely American. We perfected it. It is now one of the core truths that we build upon. And he said, we've got to worry about losing that. States' rights, federal government, the king swooping in, overriding what a local government does. I guess that's a prerogative of the king, even though American tradition, and particularly what conservatives have been preaching for so long, what Donald Trump has been preaching, Republican platform has been preaching, what Speaker Johnson has been preaching, is the federal government should not be intruding on these local decisions. But if you're the king, what are your limits, Sam?
None. But here's my thing. We've spent the last 8, 9, 10 years talking about all the ways Trump's hypocritical, all the way Republicans are hypocritical, and nothing seems to. They keep doing the same shit, and doesn't seem to matter how much you point out they're hypocritical or not.
Yeah, it's really just astounding. And as I've said, the media is wrong about this. It's not because they're afraid of Trump. That's a small part of it. It's because they agree with Trump. There is no
Mm,
daylight between Trump and 90% of the Republicans in the U.S. House and the Senate, as well as in state governments. There is no, hardly any longer any so-called moderate mainstream Republicans. How many of Trump's nominees have been rejected by the Senate?
zero.
Zero. Not a single one. None has had more than three uh, Republicans voting against them. Not enough to overturn.
And Kash Patel, one of the most controversial ones, was just appointed today, confirmed today.
Yes, the least qualified individual ever to be appointed to head the FBI, an open partisan. He's denied what he said in his book was an enemies list. But if you look at what he said, of course it was an enemies list. He was singling out people for retribution. As I said, you've heard me say this before, it's not new. Trump has claimed, he is the supporter of merit. No longer any of these affirmative action programs for those who have been discriminated against. But what he's done, of course, is nominate the least meritorious set of federal officials in the history of the country, not just Kash Patel. Look at Pete Hegseth. We warned about Pete Hegseth, right? We said this guy doesn't have the qualifications to be a mid-level commander in the military, much less to head the military as Secretary of Defense. And what did he do in his first important public performance? Do you remember what he said?
No.
Completely blew it. Gave away the store, gave away all our leverage prior to negotiations,
Oh, right.
saying, oh no, no chance Ukraine could ever be a member of NATO. I'm sure President Putin is saying, thank you very much. And America is not going to be guaranteeing the security with American troops after a ceasefire. President Putin, thank you very much. Music to his ears, essentially repeating Russian propaganda. He kind of had to walk that path because it was so embarrassing, and his supporters called it a rookie mistake. Do you make a rookie the head of the biggest military establishment in the world?
I'll do
Is
it.
that
Why
the
not?
place you would put a rookie?
I'm just as good as Hegseth, pretty much. I mean, I don't have military service, but I'm not an alcoholic, so that's a plus for me that he doesn't have.
You haven't harassed women.
I haven't harassed women. There you go.
You haven't messed up your one management position at some small charity.
Put me in, coach.
You're way more qualified to be Secretary of State. As I said, you could pick a name out of the phone book. I know there aren't phone books anymore, but give me a little license because I'm an old
I'll
dinosaur.
give you that one. You can still use that phrase
Yeah.
because people know what you mean
They'd
when you
probably
say
be a
that.
better Secretary of Defense than Pete Hegseth. And not to mention RFK Jr., a purveyor of quack science, and all of that. They've shut down vital medical research. They've shut down information that is so important to guarding against diseases and pandemics. It's just been, I've used this word before, Shonda, a shame. Merit, not even close. It's affirmative action for Trump loyalists.
And the thing is, I don't know if you saw this today, but Trump ended Black History Month at all federal agencies, but then he himself today hosted a Black History Month event. So if that doesn't go to show you that this is all political, he wants to go in front of a big black audience and talk about how great he is for black people and help himself politically with the black vote, but he doesn't want anybody outside of his own political orbit to be able to celebrate Black History Month. It's
Right,
insane.
because, he uses DEI as an excuse to erase American history as if, never had any real discrimination. America was a leader in ending slavery. It's all in the 1776 project that Trump put together in his first term, even though we were one of the great laggards behind Britain and France and most other nations in ending slavery. And what did it take to end slavery in America?
The war.
A bloody civil
Yeah.
war, the bloodiest war we've ever had. Projected today's population, it would be many, many millions of deaths, from the Civil War. So, yeah, and he wants to make believe there's no discrimination left in America, we're pure meritocracy, forgetting about the fact that there are enormous wealth and income gaps between people like him, white Americans, and minorities, and forgetting about the fact that we've talked about so much on this show, that the real issue in America is the fact that $13 trillion in wealth over the last 25 years or so has gone from 99% of us to the 1%, people like Trump and Musk. And by the way, Sam, you know
Yes,
this better than I, perhaps. I just posted on this on X.
I do.
There's a human cost to what Trump and Musk are doing, leaving aside all the ways in which they are crushing vital functions of government, violating the Constitution, violating law. Leave all that aside. People who are being fired are being harmed. People whose livelihoods depend, whose rent and food depend upon their jobs, are being fired. People are told they're being fired because they're incompetent, even though they have been on the job long enough to get an evaluation or had an excellent evaluation. People abroad are being left in dangerous situations with no place to go home to. Real people are really being hurt in extraordinary ways. And who's doing this? A couple of lavish, comfortable billionaires. And do you think for one moment they give a tinker's darn about what's happening to these ordinary Americans whose lives they are upending?
And not only billionaires, they're both trust fund babies. Both of their fathers were rich. So they weren't these self-made billionaires like a Mark Zuckerberg or a Jeff Bezos, as you like to call him. Jeff Bezos. Trump inherited his dad's rich real estate company, and I'm pretty sure Musk's dad was like a fine gem miner in South Africa.
So it's not like they worked their ways up from poverty to
Right.
be where they are.
And Trump is saying, I believe you have to show up to work to work. For 36 years, Dad, when he was running the Trump organization, you know what his commute was?
2 minutes. No, in his own place.
No, not even 2 minutes. Second, hold on.
Right, in his own place. He just had to take the elevator, right?
Yes, his commute was seconds from his penthouse down an escalator to his office. Right. So this is the guy that's saying, you got to show up to work, while for 36 years, he went down an elevator to his office. So,
and meanwhile, the other thing I saw, where does he spend so much of his time? Working in the White House? Yes. And, one of the hypocrisy is so great, it boggles the mind, and it's just so hard to keep up. And he's out on the golf course, telling, again, everyday Americans who might have a crushing commute, might not even have means of commuting. You got to go to the office. Oh, yeah, sure. And here I am, out on the golf course, a big portion of the time when I'm supposed to be working.
There's actually but there's already evidence and studies that show people are more effective when they don't have to deal with some sort of grueling commute. And that at-home work is just as effective, if not cases more effective, than showing up to an office.
Yeah, the studies are pretty clear on that. But, here's the other thing. What Musk and Trump are doing are not based on any studies, any analysis, any science, quite the opposite. They're based on the two of them, their own biases and their own politics. They are so incompetent. Who did that they fired workers at the organization that manages our nuclear weapons and makes sure our nuclear weapons are safe. what could be a more important function of government? And then all of a sudden they go, oh my gosh, look what we've done. That's how incompetent they are. And they're trying to get desperately to get these people back. They abolished the Safety Advisory Board of the Federal Aviation Administration. They're firing people at the Federal Aviation Administration at the very time that on Trump's watch, there have been an unprecedented number of aircraft tragedies. They're firing 7,000 people in the IRS, and the IRS is not inefficient. For every dollar you spend on the IRS, you reap many, many more dollars in taxes. So why are they gutting the IRS, Sam? Not to save money.
Specifically the IRS or the.
I want to talk for the moment about the IRS.
Go ahead.
What do you think? So people like them won't have their taxes audited.
Oh, yeah, right.
Trump is always complaining about his taxes being audited. You gut the IRS, you greatly diminish the capacity to audit, and you increase, you do not decrease the deficit. So too, undermining our scientific research and our health professionals. That's not going to save money. That's going to cost a huge amount of money, because what happens when people get sick, Sam? They can't work.
Right.
So you lose the productivity, you lose the taxes. They have to go to hospitals and clinics, which puts additional pressure and additional costs on the private sector and on the government. So, a lot of what they're doing not only doesn't save money, but is going to cost money and cost significant amounts of money. And of course, so much of this is based on lies. One of the biggest lies was, tens of millions, maybe 100 million Americans are getting Social Security when in fact they are what? Dead.
Oh, I don't know. You ask me so many questions. It's hard to keep up sometimes.
100 million people or so dead people getting Social Security. How many are really getting Social Security who are dead?
None.
Essentially none. And they even had to walk back that big lie. They had canceled some contracts worth like 8 or 10 million. They claimed they saved 8 to 10 billion. And in fact, none of the savings that they've claimed are actually supported by audited documentation. None of it. And as I said, none of this takes into account the collateral costs of what they're doing. As I said, you can fire a few people, responsible for our health and for researching life-saving diseases, and you claim that saves money, but it's going to cost you vastly greater monies. Or gutting the IRS. Yeah, you save on the employees, but it's going to cost you vastly more in lost tax revenue.
I guarantee this is my prediction, Dad. You're the prediction guy, but this is my prediction. I guarantee the average American will not see any cuts from their taxes based on any of these cuts that they've done so far.
None, not a penny.
My prediction is that before the midterms, Trump and the Republicans will put forth a massive tax cut that will be funded by most of these cuts, that will go towards the rich, big corporations, and cutting regulation. And your average American will see no difference in their taxes.
Or a trivial difference.
Right.
Or some bone to the ordinary Americans, but it'll be trivial compared to the enormous gains.
Right.
We already got enormous gains from the previous Trump tax cuts. But I have to say, too late, too little. We warned about this for months before the election. The American people are catching on by huge margins. The American people think Elon Musk has too much influence on our government. By wide margins, people find a lot of what Trump is doing is highly unpopular, and his approval rating has slid. It was never great, but it's now down somewhere 45, 46%. Of all American presidents, since this kind of polling has started, you know, like 70 years ago, who has the lowest ratings for their first month?
Trump? Or
Donald Trump.
I keep getting confused. I keep seeing headlines where it says that his approval rating is growing and really high, and then I see
It's
other ones.
nonsense. It may be high compared to the first term when it was so bad, but it's not. It's lower than any other president except Trump. And it was, the highest it ever was 49.5% by the 538 average. No other president in the first month, and that was just the first weeks when you're at your highest, was ever below 50%. And he's now slid down towards the 45 to 46% mark. However you measure it, except for Trump himself, he has the lowest approval rating for an early president in the modern history of the country. And compared to a lot of presidents, he's way behind. It's not even close, including Barack Obama, by the way, who he's always ragging on.
All right. Is there anything else on your mind, Ed, or do you want to get to questions?
Oh, there's always a lot on my mind, but why don't we get to questions? Should I put my crown back on for the questions?
Yeah, but let's see the crown again.
Let's see the crown. King Al the First.
Can you see anything right now, or are you totally in the dark? There you go.
King Al the First, the direct descendant of King Saul and King David.
I've never. Is this something you're making up just for the show, or I've never heard
Of
this
course,
before? Oh, okay. I was gonna say I've never
my
heard
only
this.
point is I have as much claim to be a king as Trump did,
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
as does every American that you would pull out of the phone book.
Okay, I get it. Because I was like, wait, you never told me we were descendants of these people, but okay, I get it.
You know, us Jewish people have to stick together.
Right. Some housekeeping things, Dad. If you're watching, we have 1,800 people watching, Dad, but we only have 583 likes. It does a lot to help the channel if you like the stream. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed. Click that bell to get notifications. You can follow us both on social media at the tags below. Also, members and donations get priority on questions. We can't get to every question, but if you're a member and if you donate, there's a chance. So you're saying there's a chance. All right, Dad, you ready for the first question?
I want to say one more thing that's on my mind that I
Yes.
forgot. Remember, I'm old and,
Yeah.
all. Another really telling poll number is what do you think most Americans wanted Trump to focus on? Firing people?
Lowering
I
costs.
think was their number one concern that they cared about. Ordinary Americans.
Inflation and lowering costs.
Right. Exactly. The economy. 62% in the latest poll, I think it was the CNN poll that you mentioned, say Trump has not done enough to deal with inflation and the economy. Remember, Trump said, oh, from day one, prices are going to start to go down because, I'm going to introduce the new golden age. Well, prices have gone up and are likely to continue going up. But did Trump claim blame for that?
No, he said he had, in fact, I think in the Fox News interview, he literally threw up his hands and he said, inflation's back. I have nothing to do with it.
It was all Biden or maybe Obama or maybe Lyndon Johnson or maybe Franklin Roosevelt. Anybody but me. And what did he say about the Ukraine war? When did he say he would end it?
Day one.
Day one. Well, we're now, day 20 some odd and not close to ending it. And we talked about, his bending to Putin. The last thing we need is to end the war on Putin's terms. And, again, he's tried to totally rewrite history. That somehow Ukraine started the war. That somehow, despite Russia invading a sovereign country in violation of the UN Charter, something almost never happens, somehow Ukraine started the war. This is like, Hitlerian propaganda. It was really Poland's fault that we invaded them, because they weren't giving us our living space or Lebensraum. Once you lose history and you lose the truth, you lose everything.
Right. I mean, he's clearly laying the groundwork to justify him totally screwing over Ukraine in the negotiation talks. That's what he's doing.
Oh, clearly. I mean, he's not even really disguising it.
No. All right, let's get to our questions. Our first question is from Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi with a big donation. Thank you so much. They say, Do you
We need
agree?
those donations. They'll keep us going. So this is hard work. It looks easy, but it ain't.
Do you agree with Professor Richard Wolff's assessment that America is an empire in decline?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Uh, our influence over the world certainly seems to be, even in just a few weeks of Trump, in decline. One of the worst things he did, among all the horrible things that we talked about, that we've talked about before, but we haven't emphasized, is he's, in Musk's words, wants to put USAID in the wood chipper, an organization set up in 1961. It's a congressional agency. They have no power under the law to put it in the wood chipper, but they don't care about that. It saved tens of millions of lives, and it is essential for what we call soft power. You know what soft power is, Sam?
Yeah, that's when you like make ice cream and soft serve, and the power machines company, it's called Soft Power, and it gives you nice soft serve ice cream.
Once again, you're
Is that
right on
right?
the money.
Oh, cool, nice.
Yeah, we're giving ice cream to the world, in effect, promoting a huge amount of goodwill. You know, you can scare people with your military, but that's not good enough. You need people to respect you, to understand that you're in their interests. And Trump is abolishing that and destroying that, as well as undermining the collective security that we've built for 75 years. So, yes, I see our power and influence around the world in decline, and I see the dictators rising up the way we saw in the 1930s and 40s.
Do you think that, I mean, that's a pretty quick decline. I mean, we basically became a superpower, what, like, you know, 80, 90 years ago? That's a pretty
Yeah,
quick,
after World War II.
right.
I mean, we're always powerful, but our reach around the world really began in the most significant way with the beginning of the Cold War.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that's a pretty quick drop off. Is that just because the modern world just moves quicker? I mean, Rome was an empire for what, hundreds and hundreds of years. The Chinese ruled mainland China. You know, like this seems kind of crazy to say that
The
after, you
world
know,
is moving much more quickly
right.
than ever before, and things can be lost now in an eyelash.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, especially,
And, I'm not going to put it all on Trump. America was under strain well before Trump, with Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Putin's effort to restore the Soviet Empire, the rise of China, China challenging us in the Far East, the rise of dictatorships around the world. So, no, it's not all Trump. It certainly, it didn't happen just in a flash. It well predates Trump, but he's accelerated it.
right. And, you know, the rise of India, just their sheer population now is putting them into
Yeah.
a superpower mode.
A rise of international terrorism, which is by no means ended.
Yeah. This is from Four Door Glory. They say, we are our former presidents. Oh, no. Where are our former presidents, legal scholars, etc.? They're all just sitting on the sidelines saying nothing, doing nothing to preserve our republic, just enriching themselves by doing zip zero nada. We must act now.
I've talked about this last week. Our greatest former president by far was Jimmy Carter, who did not hesitate to criticize when he thought his successors were leading us astray. He was a very powerful, very effective critic, for example, of George W. Bush and what he was doing in Iraq. It is a crying shame that our former presidents, our most prominent leaders, are not sounding the five-alarm fire and speaking out in the strongest terms and even organizing in opposition to the rise of someone who claims to be king.
But, like, there are plenty of very powerful people who know law very well that are. I mean, I don't think there's any lack of raising the five alarm fire, but what good does that do? I mean, it's too late. He won. He's got all the power. What is raising a big hoopla?
We tried raving it before the election, and
Yeah,
people weren't listening. You can't give up. You can't get, there's another election, presumably, if, Trump doesn't spike it. There's
yeah,
another election coming up in 2026. There are off-year elections, a very important one in Virginia. You know what the election in Virginia is about? They elect their governors on off years. A
Yeah.
very important gubernatorial election in Virginia. Very important. This phony baloney moderate Youngkin, who's really another Trumpian. Very important not to elect another Trumpian as his successor. So
No.
yes, there's things that can be done. Unfortunately, I agree. It's much too little, much too late, but it's not nothing.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't like. Okay, so Obama comes out and is like, "What Trump is doing is despicable." Like, I just don't see that making any difference. I don't know. I
It's
don't.
more important that George W. Bush comes out, a Republican.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think either
And, Trump
matters.
has dumped all over Bush, has dissed him so many times. Where is Bush? He should be out there. His vice president is out there, but, vice presidents do not have the same cachet.
I
Again,
wouldn't.
it's not a panacea, but we have to battle the kingship on all fronts. No
Yeah,
one initiative is going to solve it, but we can't give up on anything.
yeah. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna wait for George W. Bush to come out. I'm
Don't hold your breath.
right. That I'm not
But I can
hopeful.
still say, George, do it. Not that he'll listen to me or you.
Um, James Lagruda says, "How will Trump's actions on Russia and Ukraine affect the foreign policy keys? Also, I made the mistake of voting yes on Tuesday, but please do not invite Steve Bannon on the show." And that's from a viewer, not me.
We have no plans to invite Steve Bannon. We listened, it was a small majority on our poll to invite him, but those who were opposed to it were very strongly opposed to it. We listen to our audience. We respect our audience. Even though we're the descendants of kings, we're not going to act with royal prerogatives. So we have no plans to invite Steve Bannon. So what was the question again?
Um, how will the Trump's actions on Russia and
Oh,
Ukraine
on farm, what do I say about speculation and hypotheticals?
I don't know. I can't remember all your sayings.
I avoid
Oh
that.
yeah, I know generally you
Yeah.
avoid that.
Yeah,
Yes.
generally, the devil is always in the details, and certainly there's a lot of potential here to win or lose both keys,
Right.
depending, as I said, the devil is in the details, and we have no idea at this point what the details might be, although the direction is certainly very, very dangerous. You
Yeah.
know, we don't want to repeat Munich of 1938, when Britain, appeased the dictator Hitler, which only encouraged him. You appease Putin, you're only going to encourage him. You're not going to stop him.
Next question. How will Trump? Oh, I just read that one. Next question. Do the Europeans have any power to push the negotiations to include NATO and Ukraine?
So far, no. You know,
But why
as I
not?
said, this would be like the U.S. negotiating with Hitler after he invaded Poland, without France, without Britain. So far, our European allies, at least for the moment, they're still our allies. That's getting shaky. Uh, have been sidelined, as has Ukraine. Again, this is with Trump, things can change minute by minute, much less day by day. So we really don't know at this point how things are going to shake out, although they're off to a very bad start.
So does Europe have enough resources to help Ukraine without us, or do they need us?
I think they need us.
Really?
Again, I'm not a military expert, but a lot of the military experts say Ukraine to survive needs support from the US. And so too, if the US, pulls out, that's on a moral basis, that's going to make it more difficult for Europe to be steadfast.
Right. Our first Discord question of the night. If you want to join our Discord or hang out on Reddit, the links to those are in the description of this video. This is from Cinnamon Roll. They say, Professor, I feel like the Dems are still spineless. Hakeem Jeffries quoted Maya Angelou in an interview and said that they have no leverage in getting things done in response to Jon Stewart asking him how the Dems are going to counter Project 2025. Is the Democratic Party just finished because of their inaction and complacency?
Well, the great British Prime Minister Disraeli once said, finality is not a word we use in politics. So I won't say they're finished, but they certainly are doing everything in their power to prove the truth of my one sentence description of American politics. Republicans have no principles, Democrats have no spine. One of our very smart audience suggested that what the Democrats and other critics of Trump need to do is form a shadow cabinet, like we've seen in some of the European nations, to become a focal point, not just for criticizing Trump and Musk, but for proposing alternatives that rebound to the benefit of the American people. Democrats need a message and they need a focal point. Maybe you can become the shadow president, Sam, in a shadow cabinet.
I don't like this idea of shadow cabinets and shadow presidents. It just seems like a recipe for disaster. I don't know.
I like it. It's a bad term, but we need a focal point. It can't just be scattered. And I don't care what you call it, but we need a focal point. We need a united front of opposition. You know,
Yeah, I hear
one
that.
of the hallmarks of any authoritarian is divide and conquer, and that's working so far for Trump.
Yeah, I get that. This is sort of a. I'm going to combine these two questions from Pepper Step and Hillary Hacks. Essentially, they're asking, is there anything from history to compare to what's happening today? Um, Essentially, that's what they're asking.
Yeah, I think I've answered that last week, but I'll say it again. No, there's no precedent for what Trump has been doing in less than a month of his administration. If we want to find, the closest analog, I said it was during the Iran-Contra scandal, which everybody thinks is selling arms to the terrorist country of Iran and illegally diverting the profits to the Contras in Nicaragua. That's only a small piece of it. What was really going on in Iran-Contra was William Casey, the CIA director, creating a government within a government. They called it Project Democracy, accountable to no one, not to the Defense Department, not to Justice, not to the State Department. Oliver North, the point man for Project Democracy, said this was an independent, off-the-shelf operation that will enable us to carry out any operations that we want. In effect, we now have a government within a government in Elon Musk. Of course, there are some analogs on a different basis to Richard Nixon, who also subverted the law and subverted the Constitution in order to advance his own biases in politics. And there are analogs to Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist, anti-gay crusade of the 1950s.
I know Trump and modern conservatives love to hoist up Reagan as this shining example and this model that Trump is following. Do you think that's true at all or no?
Not even close. You know, the close, as I said, the
Yeah.
commonality is in Iran-Contra, but the special prosecutor spent 7 years, could never pin it specifically on Reagan. Reagan was known as the slider, very hard to pin anything on him. But he said he did create an atmosphere conducive to that. But, Reagan himself did not act in a way that Donald Trump did. Reagan actually had three priorities, and only three priorities. One was, of course, his economic program, and there was an analog to Trump there, tax cuts and deregulation. Two, anti-communism, you know, fighting the Soviet Empire, which is kind of, if you look at Putin as the heir to the Soviet Empire, Trump is doing the opposite of what Reagan did. And thirdly, trying to negotiate an end to the scourge of nuclear weapons. But, you know, leaving aside Iran-Contra, which we were never able to establish was Reagan, he didn't run roughshod over the law and the Constitution the way Reagan did, and he didn't delegate the kind of authority to someone else. He did set up a similar thing. It was called the Grace Commission, also headed by a big rich person, J.P. de Grace, the head of W.R. Grace and Company. But they did it the right way. They didn't go slashing and burning through the government arbitrarily, cutting vital programs. It was only set up in the middle of Reagan's second year. And what they did was, quite properly, they did their research. They came up with what they believed was genuine waste and fraud, and then they went to the Congress. So the Grace Commission is kind of a contrary counterexample to what Trump and Musk are doing.
Very interesting. This is a question from OB Family. On current form, how confident are you that a legitimate presidential election, free of major interference, could even proceed in 2028?
I'm not very confident. I'm very worried. I can't give you a number because there's, so much that's going to happen over the next 4 years, but I'm very worried. The Republicans have just introduced legislation, which it's called the SAVE bill, which it gets through, will preclude having a fair election. In the name of combating non-existent fraud, they are now requiring, if this bill passes, that to register or re-register to vote, you have to prove documentary proof of citizenship. It means you have to have your papers. Show us your papers. You have to have a birth certificate or a U.S. passport. As many as 20 million American voters don't have that kind of documentation, even though there's no evidence of, non-citizens voting in any remotely consequential way. Plus, it's going to make it very difficult for women who are married and change their names to vote because there has to be a correspondence between your birth certificate and your identification. Now, they do provide some kind of loophole for that, but those loopholes almost never work. So already in the first few weeks, they're acting in a way that we wouldn't have a fully free and fair election ever.
Discord question from Puppy Love. They say, Professor Lichtman, when you pointed out Democrats urging Biden to step aside in 2024, I saw a similarity to 2016. On the campaign trail that year, the party the Keys favored, the Republicans, they also resented their chosen nominee. That's the only other election so far where the Keys were wrong about the popular vote. If it generally did contribute to Trump winning in 24, despite the Keys favoring Harris, do you think it also contributed to Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote in 2016, despite the Keys favoring Trump?
I didn't predict the popular vote in 2016. I only predicted Trump's win. So I'm not sure the relevance of that part of the question, but certainly what the Democrats did could well have contributed to the Keys not accurately assessing 2024. I was, I think, the strongest, loudest voice in criticizing what the Democrats were doing, in saying your best chance to win is to stick with Biden. They didn't do that. And then, of course, I got blasted for being wrong in my prediction. Fair enough. But people forgot that I was advocating for a very different course for the Democrats to follow.
I guess they're making an interesting point in the fact that in 2016, a lot of kind of establishment Republicans were very against Trump, right? And in 2024, a lot of establishment Democrats were against Biden, and the Republican nominee went forward and won, and the Joe Biden didn't, and the Democrats lost. Maybe that's an interesting thing to look at. I don't know.
Yeah, that's something to think about. And as I said, this is not something I argued in retrospect, right, Sam?
Right.
I was right there at the time saying Democrats were making a huge mistake.
Yeah. Member Brady Engen says, how specific are the budgets that Congress pass? Does Congress state that each department, for example, receives X amount of funds? Or do they go further and state that each department has to spend X amount of money on staff and specific programs? How much discretion does the president have for managing government departments?
It's a great question. I'm not a lawyer.
You're
so
not?
Take what we say, with a grain of salt. They definitely appropriate for particular departments and agencies. and the president does not have the authority to impound that money, to say we're not going to spend any money on AID, for example. They also do appropriate money for specific programs within the departments. For example, Trump now wants Congress to appropriate money to build his border wall, a very specific program. And again, when Congress appropriates for specific programs, uh, the president should not have the authority to impound those funds. And the ability of Trump to impound money, this goes back to Richard Nixon. Nixon, who thought like Trump, he could pretty much do anything he wanted as president, you know, tried to impound money, and Congress responded with the Impoundment Act of 1974, which now Trump claims is unconstitutional. Therefore, I don't have to follow it. Of course, he doesn't have a right to proclaim what's constitutional or not. Who does that, Sam?
I wasn't listening.
Who decides whether a law is constitutional or not? The president?
The judges.
The courts. But of course, he doesn't believe in the third branch of government. If you're a king, there are no other branches of government. As a king of France, Louis XIV, once said, I am the state.
I am the state.
It's me and only me and no one else.
Sean Kofi says, can we urgently discuss the new information about the voting machines being hacked? I'm not familiar with any new information. Are you, Dad?
I'm not either. I know there are those who claim that. We've avoided that because we don't have the expertise. And those who do, not just Trump people, but a lot of independent sources, the civil rights organizations, Democratic governors and attorney generals have not raised an alarm about that. So I'm not sure what new information is out there, but if you want to steer us to it in the chat, please do.
Andrew says, is Trump accidentally making China the new global superpower with the instability he is causing in the U.S. and destruction of our soft power?
No question. Who steps in when we withdraw, Sam?
China.
China, and to a lesser extent, Russia. Plus, if we're pulling the plug on Ukraine, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but what might that encourage China to do?
Invade Taiwan.
Invade Taiwan. If we're not going to defend Ukraine, why in the world would we defend Taiwan? I'm not predicting that. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but certainly Trump is opening the door to that, and that's very, very dangerous. Taiwan is no pushover, by the way. I've been to Taiwan. It is an incredibly dynamic, modern, sophisticated nation and economy with a very strong military. Everybody thought Russia, the great power, would just steamroll over Ukraine. Well, almost 3 years later, that hasn't happened. And I'm not convinced China will just steamroll over Taiwan, but I am convinced would be a horrible tragedy. It would destabilize the balance of power, not just in the Far East, but all over the world, and likely result in huge numbers of death and suffering.
Channel 1 Texas with a $10 donation. They say, what do y'all think of Virginia Governor Youngkin promising aid to fired federal workers, but still backing the cuts by Trump in his state?
It's another example of rank hypocrisy. I am not a fan of Governor Youngkin. I think he's a phony. He campaigned on being a moderate, but has just, like virtually every other Republican, just fallen in line behind Trump.
This is sometimes what I say. This is from Lexi Campbell. They say, Professor, how do you think the Democrats should move forward in messaging? It seems since the election that the battle is just Trump is bad. How can a person who wants to run change this?
Absolutely, that needs to be changed. Probably for at least 10 years, maybe 20 years, I've been screaming about the Democrats, saying how bad they've been at messaging. yes, you do need to point out all the dangers of Trump, but even beyond that, when the Democrats have had a good message, it has been, what are they going to do for ordinary Americans? The great Democratic presidents didn't shy away from that. Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson had great messages for ordinary Americans. Unfortunately, Johnson blew it with the Vietnam War. But leaving that aside, these presidents convinced ordinary Americans that they were on their side. And somehow that slipped away, and they've got to restore it. I'm not a message expert, but your brilliant mom is, and we're going to have her on, and she's going to tell us how Democrats and generally critics of Trump uh, can develop an effective, simple, compelling message.
I've seen, I know you've got beef with him, but I've seen Bernie Sanders recently on a lot of shows and podcasts talking about that. And I think he presents a good message. I mean, Democrats have to get back to concrete, progressive values that help your average American,
Exactly. And maybe, Bernie Sanders got a lot of baggage, but maybe kind of a better harbinger of a superior Democratic message is AOC.
Yeah.
She's been really effective.
Comic Fan says, what are your thoughts on Elon Musk saying he is thinking of auditing the Fed?
Chilling. Elon Musk doesn't audit. He takes a meat axe and then tries to justify what he's doing. Everything he's doing is in his own interest. This is a guy laden with conflicts of interest. This is his own biases and his own politics. Trump has said, oh, we don't have to worry about conflicts of interest. Musk has so much money already, that's not a concern for him. If you believe that, and as I've said many times, I have a big bridge from my hometown in Brooklyn to sell you. The one thing that drives rich people is what, Sam?
Money, money, money.
Yes, let's get even richer. You never can be rich enough.
I think the other thing with Musk too is that he is so driven to make his businesses, the top most influential businesses in the world. And because he has to rely on the government so much for money, for regulation, it's not that he's just doing this because he wants to get rich. He wants to do this because he wants to move his companies higher and higher and higher.
Wealth and power.
Right, power.
I talk a lot about what drives politics and economics in this country, and it's always wealth, power, and sex. That explains almost everything.
Chill out, bro. Chill the hell out. This is an interesting question from... How many more questions you want? We're getting to the end here.
4 more questions.
4 more questions.
Are you doing your after show?
Here's the good news, Dad. The after show is coming up right after this at Sammy Licht on YouTube and on Twitch. This is from Private CM. They said, did losses in the 80s push Dems to be more centrist?
Absolutely. Democrats were very disillusioned after, kind of mainstream liberals, Walter Mondale in 1984, and especially Mike Dukakis in 1988, lost. Liberalism seemed to have become a dirty word. And that, period led to the Democratic Leadership Council, headed by, guess who, Sam? What kind of new wave politician in the 1980s headed the council? Someone, very famous, the most famous politician for the Democrats for the 80s and 90s.
Ted Kennedy.
No, Bill Clinton.
Oh, I don't know.
Ted Kennedy was not a centrist,
I wasn't really listening.
Yeah, let's have a new way. Let's triangulate between liberals and conservatives. Let's show we're not soft on crime. We're not soft on commies. We believe in traditional values. So yes, the caller is absolutely right.
No callers. You said callers.
Oh my God. I'm so yesterday.
This is not a 1980s call-in show, Dad.
Right. You invoked the 80s.
Right.
90s. Hey, I was already old in the 90s.
Um, this is a question from No Name. Trump wants a 2026 new nuclear deal with Russia and maybe China for a nuke-free world. Is that why he's giving Ukraine away?
No, I don't think that's why he's giving Ukraine away. I think that's independent of that. Uh, and I have no idea. You never know with Trump whether that's just rhetoric or how serious that might be, or what he intends to give away to China and Russia in those talks. So I'm waiting to see.
Right. Two more questions. This is from Jason Rodriguez. Was it wrong for Biden to stop building the wall that was appropriated by Congress? The southern border wall, I'm assuming he's
I don't
speaking.
think, I'm trying to remember, but I do not believe the southern border wall was appropriated by Congress. The wall was never fully built, even under Trump, but I think he took money out of another pocket to build the wall. I don't think there was any legislation on building a wall that passed the Congress. Uh, if I'm wrong, one of our smart, I won't call them callers, audience can correct me, but I don't think I'm wrong.
Our last question of the night comes from 80 Mart. They want you to name one or two things that are good about Trump.
I've done that before. I think, although on balance, I think he's a clear and present danger to our democracy. But, he is very effective on messaging, much more so than Democrats, which, doesn't make him popular, but he should be wildly unpopular. A guy who's a multiple felon, civilly found to have sexually assaulted women, twice impeached, but he is very effective on messaging and is much more forceful than his Democratic opponents.
All right. With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for the night. Shout out to people who donated who didn't get their questions asked in the show. KS, Sharon Novak, Allison Waller, Jason Rodriguez, Dudley Murdoch, Brennan Ziegler, Private CM, Dusty Cole. I think some of those people did get their questions on the show.
Thank you for the donations. They'll keep us going.
Yes, thank you for the donations. The Lichtman Live post show is coming up right after this. I'll put the link to that in the chat. It's also in the description of this video. Dad, what are your final words to the people on this night, February 20th, 2025?
Well, throughout history, there have been conflicts about who legitimate kings are, who the legitimate heirs are. It's resulted in murders and kidnapping. Well, I will say that King Lichtman is a much more legitimate king than King Trump. Good night, all.
And with that, good night.